Okay, picture this. It is July 30, 1930, Montevideo, Uruguay. The stadium gates open at 8 a.m. By midday, 2 full hours before kickoff, the ground is already full. 93,000 people pack into a stadium that just 6 weeks earlier didn't exist. The stadium was set to host every single match of this tournament, but wasn't even inaugurated until 5 days after it all began. On the pitch, Uruguay and Argentina are about to play in the first ever World Cup final. The ref only accepted the job on the condition that he could hop on a ship the fuck out of there the second the job was done. Oh, and he refed in a full suit for some reason. But before the game can start, there is an argument about the ball. Argentina want to use their ball, Uruguay want to use theirs. Neither will back down. FIFA's solution? Each team gets their way for one half. Argentina win the first half playing with their ball, leading 2-1 at halftime. Uruguay win the second half playing with theirs, the final score being 4-2. The following day is declared a national holiday in Uruguay, and in Argentina, the Uruguayan consulate gets stoned. And so the first ever FIFA World Cup was etched into the history books. But if you think the first World Cup final was tense, sit down and buckle up, because the story of how we got here and the fact that we even have a World Cup is frankly insane. To fully understand where we sit as we head into the 2026 World Cup, we need to go way back to a world that feels hard to imagine. A world without a World Cup. The year is 1900, it is the turn of the 20th century, and we are at the Olympics. Different tournament, I know, but bear with me here. Football is there, sure, but not really. It's a demonstration sport. There's no national teams, no professionals, nothing like we see today. The same story goes in 1904. It's not until 1908 at the London Olympics that football becomes a legit medal sport. This is the first real glimpse of the world game that we know today. But there's nobody steering the ship. FIFA had only been founded 4 years earlier in May 1904, and at the time, only 7 countries, France, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland, had agreed that the sport even needed an international governing body. England, the guys who invented it, weren't there. They were invited, but if you think they were going to be told what to do about the sport that they invented, you clearly don't know any English people. By April the following year, England finally conceded and joined. Fun fact, the guy who got it all going, Robert Guerin, was a French journalist. He ran the ship for a short and sharp 2 years, tried to get the first international tournament off the ground, largely failed, and quit shortly thereafter. And just a year after England joined, Daniel Burley-Woolfall took over the reins and became the first English president of FIFA, despite the country having 2/5 of fuck all interest being involved just 2 years earlier. Don't get too attached to their participation though, because they proceeded to leave again in 1920 and didn't play a World Cup for the first 20 years of the tournament. So basically, under Woolfall, FIFA did a lot of the establishing stuff that was needed to set the groundwork for them to be a legitimate governing body. Rules of play, constitutions, all that sort of stuff, and oversaw FIFA supervising football at the 1908 Olympics. By 1914, FIFA agreed to officially recognize the Olympics as the, quote, World Football Championship for amateurs, and agreed to organize the event. This is the closest we have come to a World Cup. Momentum is building. And then on the second morning of the 1914 FIFA Congress, somebody assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, and it all went to shit, both in terms of football and geopolitics. It doesn't take a historian to know that World War I, which at the time we weren't calling World War I because we optimistically thought we weren't going to end up in the same situation a few years later, was bad. But when the war first broke out, football kept going, at least in England, a decision that was heavily criticised. Following the backlash, the FA eventually changed tack and encouraged players to enlist and used matches as recruitment drives. Entire club squads went to war and hundreds of players died in battle. By 1915, competitive football was suspended entirely, and by January 1916, it became apparent that the Berlin Olympics weren't gonna happen. Domestic football didn't exist, and the concept of the world game couldn't have felt further from reality. This is where I need to introduce you to a man named Jules Rimet. Rimet was in the room when FIFA recognized the Olympics as the World Championship back in 1914, but he always knew there was something bigger. So Jules Rimet was the devout Catholic son of a grocer who grew up in a small French village, studied law, and interestingly, never played serious football. He helped found the Parisian club Red Star at just 24 years of age, but like everyone else in this story, his football dreams screeched to a halt when the idea of a World Cup was replaced by the reality of a world war. At 41 with a wife and 3 kids, Rimet joined the army just months after he was sitting in that FIFA Congress. It's crazy how quickly this all happened, but he miraculously survived after 4 years on the front line. And his passion for football only grew as he hoped to rebuild the world game that the war had decimated. In 1919, he became the president of the French Football Federation, and on March 1, 1921, he became FIFA president, a moment that would change football forever. He held this role until 1954, becoming the longest-serving president in FIFA's history, building up the organization from 12 member nations to 85, and of course, birthing the World Cup. It's hard to explain just what a mammoth undertaking this was for Rimet, because football post-World War I was a whole different ballgame, pardon the pun. The war had decimated international relations, and to put it bluntly, nations weren't too keen to kick a football around against countries they'd just been in battle against. When the war ended in 1918, FIFA had to decide what to do with the countries that had just lost. Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Do they get to come back to international football? Do you play against them? Do you pretend the last 4 years didn't happen? While FIFA were trying to work out what they wanted to do, the British associations made their point crystal fucking clear. They would not share a pitch with the defeated nations under any circumstances. They gave FIFA the ultimatum to ban the Central Powers or lose the fathers of football. And when FIFA didn't concede to the demand, they did what they said. They left in 1920. I want you to just imagine being Jules Rimet. 7 years ago, you're sitting in a room dreaming of something bigger than an Olympic champion, with all the hope in the world. Now you're finally handed the keys to the castle. You can make your dream a reality. But when you open the front door, you realize it is a decrepit pigsty. By the time Rimet became the boss, FIFA had lost all of Britain, had no money, no power, and he wanted to sell the dream of global football to a population that was grappling with the aftermath of the worst world war in human history. But my boy Jules did not give up. With the British gone and no World Cup in existence, the Olympics becomes everything. And at the 1924 Paris Olympics, something happens that changes the conversation permanently. Enter Uruguay. Football wasn't new to South America by any means, but because we're talking about the early 20th century, when your best chance of intercontinental travel was a trip on the Titanic, Europe hadn't really seen it before. Ultimately, Uruguay dominated the competition. And fun fact, this is widely credited to be the birth of the Victory Lab. Okay, so fast forward 2 years to the FIFA Congress in 1926, when Delaunay states, quote, "Today, international football can no longer be held within the confines of the Olympics, and many countries where professionalism is now recognized and organized cannot any longer be represented by their best players." A quick little fun fact about Delaunay, he retired from refereeing after getting smacked in the face with a ball so hard he broke 2 teeth and swallowed his whistle. Had he not swallowed that whistle, we may not have a World Cup today. We also may not have the Euros. So on the 26th of May, 1928 in Amsterdam, just a day before football kicked off at the Olympics, Rimet announces plans for the inaugural World Cup. Members voted 25-5 in favor of the tournament, and the rest is history. As if we needed any more proof of concept, Uruguay went on to dominate the tournament again. They're in the final. 250,000 people try to get tickets for a 28,000-seat stadium in Amsterdam. And what do you know? The boys do it again. Back to back, baby. You actually couldn't make this shit up. The stars aligned so perfectly, you would think Rimet paid an Etsy witch. And so the plans were in motion for the first ever World Cup. Now, they just needed somewhere to host it. Initially, 6 countries put up their hands: Italy, Sweden, Spain, the Netherlands, Hungary, and Uruguay. Ultimately, all of the European nations ended up withdrawing for a number of reasons. Uruguay was Rimet's clear favourite from the start. Turns out FIFA had favourites from day dot. Uruguay also did make a compelling argument. They're the reigning Olympic champions. 1930 is the centenary of their independence, 100 years as a nation. This is a statement of identity for them. This is more than just football. And to sweeten the deal, they said that they would pay for everything. Every team that comes, travel, accommodation, everything covered. FIFA, famously never wants to turn down a giant sum of money, announced Uruguay as the host in their Barcelona Congress in 1929. No vote required, nobody else is still in the running. Interestingly, the other bidding nations didn't go to the first ever World Cup. If you ask some people, they say that it's a boycott over the decision to give Uruguay hosting duties, others cite travel concerns. And boy, oh boy, were there travel concerns. The Great Depression has just started, the world is broke, and Uruguay is a 3-week boat journey from Europe. 3 weeks there, 3 weeks back, more than 6 weeks away from club football for players who have contracts, wages, and livelihoods. You have to remember, this is a time before the World Cup was a proven concept, so the idea of losing your club players for 6+ weeks wasn't something most Europeans were too fond of. By February 1930, not a single European country has committed. Not one. Jules Rimet is personally working every contact in his Rolodex, writing letters, calling in 20 years worth of favors. The man is a certified hustler, and he eventually gets 4 European nations across the line. First up, we've got France, his home country, almost certainly a personal favor to him. Though even then, the French coach and their leading player both refused to make the trip. They sent a squad, but it wasn't their best one. Belgium was a similar story. The FIFA vice president was Belgian, so again, they didn't really have much of a choice here. And then there was Romania. This one is insane. So King Carol II of Romania is a passionate football supporter, right? So he personally selects the Romanian squad, but most of the players he's chosen are that of an English oil company. The company basically tells them, fuck around and find out. You go to Uruguay, you lose your job. So King Carol calls up the guy, ends up guaranteeing them 3 months leave and their jobs waiting for them on their return, and then also takes them home via a leisure tour of New York. Oh, to be a Romanian footballer in the 1930s. So Romania's participation turns out to be a tipping point because once they commit, Yugoslavia agree as well, on the condition that they can travel on the same boat. Ultimately, that boat ends up being full and they have to take another ship. And then there's Egypt, the only African team to enter. They're keen, but if you read about the tournament, you will see them noticeably absent. They never make it. Turns out a heavy storm that hit the Mediterranean delayed them and they missed their connecting boat. The first World Cup nearly had African representation and we lost it to bad weather. So Jules Rimet boards the SS Conte Verde with the European teams France, Romania, and Belgium, picking up more passengers at each stop along the coast. In his bag, he is personally carrying the trophy and a dream. A gold-plated sterling silver statue commissioned from French sculptor Abel Lafleur, a winged figure of Nike, the goddess of victory of Nike shoe fame. He carries this like hand luggage across the Atlantic, blissfully unaware of what he was about to create. So we're at the first World Cup and there are 13 teams total. 7 from South America, 4 from Europe, 2 from North America. England, the country that invented the sport, is still not in FIFA and therefore missed the tournament. It would be 20 years before they enter the history books. So the teams arrive in Montevideo and immediately there is a problem. The stadium specifically built for this tournament is not finished. Early games are played at 2 smaller grounds while workers race to complete it. So the tournament opens on July 13th, 1930, with 2 games being played simultaneously: France v Mexico and the USA v Belgium. France wins 4-1 with the first ever World Cup goal being scored by Lucien Laurent, who later described it saying, "Everyone was pleased, but we didn't all roll around on the ground. Nobody realized that history was being made. It was a quick handshake and we got on with the game." Nobody knew at the time what this meant. Meanwhile, USA vs Belgium game, the Americans actually scored the first ever World Cup hat-trick. That is your little fun fact to drop at the water cooler for this tournament. Now, before I get on to the final, I want to detour to one of the most chaotic stories of this tournament, as if the whole thing wasn't already mental enough. So in the semi-final between the USA and Argentina, this American physio runs on the field to treat an injured player. He drops his medical bag, and when he does, he shatters a bottle of chloroform. Now, if you know anything about chloroform, you know that that shit knocks you out cold. Next thing he knows, the physio is out like a light and has to be carried off the pitch himself. Insane. Anyway, back to the story. Now we are at the final and there's another character we need to meet, Luis Monti. This is the only player in history to play 2 World Cup finals for 2 different nations, and they could not have been more dramatic. The midfielder was one of the best players in the tournament, a big gun for Argentina. Without him, their inaugural World Cup would have been very different. He was not subtle, and he was not well liked by the opposition either. By the semi-finals, his hotel required around-the-clock police protection because he was so hated. The night before the final, death threats arrive. Not just general threats, specific targeted threats directed at Monti's family. His wife, his daughter, his parents, you name it. The message was clear. If Argentina win, there will be consequences. This would all be confirmed by his granddaughter decades later. So at halftime, Argentina are leading 2-1, but ultimately Uruguay managed to bang 3 in the second half and Argentina lose 4-2. Shit for Argentina, great for Monti, I guess. But then things get really interesting. So he joins Juventus, moves to Italy, and gets called up to the Italian national team. He had been personally requested by a guy you might be familiar with by the name of Benito Mussolini. At the time, foreign players couldn't play in Italy, but there was a loophole if they could cite Italian lineage. These guys weren't foreigners, according to Mussolini. They were, quote, the lost sons of the fatherland. This wasn't just football, this was a much deeper ideological game. So fast forward a couple of years and he is in his second World Cup final, this time for Italy against Czechoslovakia. In the dressing room before that final, a message arrives from Mussolini that gives Monti flashbacks to 1930. In 1930, it was lose or face consequences. This time, it was simple: win. Ultimately, Italy wins, Monti survives again. He would later say, I had to play 2 World Cup finals under threat. In Uruguay 1930, they wanted to hurt me if I won. In Italy 1934, they wanted to hurt me if I lost. He is still the only player in history to have appeared in 2 World Cup finals for 2 different countries. His winner's medal from 1934 was ultimately stolen in a burglary, and the FIFA Museum holds his passport, the one document that physically connects both appearances. And now we're back where it all started, July 30th, 1930. The gates open at 8 a.m., 6 full hours before kickoff. By midday, 93,000 seats are full in a city of 650,000 people. 1 in 7 people in Montevideo is at this game. An estimated 10 to 15,000 people have made the boat crossing from Buenos Aires to be at this Argentina game. The port is so overwhelmed that many of them don't even make landfall before kickoff, let alone reach the stadium. Supporters are searched at the gates for weapons. Luis Monti plays despite the threats, and the final proceeds without a hitch. 4-2 Uruguay, the first World Cup champions. Jules Rimet walks onto the pitch and presents the trophy that he carried on a 3-week boat trip in his bag. The next day is a national holiday in Uruguay. In Buenos Aires, the Uruguayan consulate is stoned by a mob. Argentina cuts off football relations with Uruguay, and the rest? That's World Cup history. And that is the story of the World Cup and how it very nearly did not happen. The country that invented football wasn't there, the stadium wasn't finished, a physio knocked himself out with chloroform, and somehow, from all of that chaos, the most watched sporting event in history was born. And just you wait, because it's about to get a hell of a lot more crazy.